All right, everyone, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. We're only 15 minutes late, so we'll make up some time on the agenda as we go. Thank you all for being here today on this gorgeous day. I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing, so thank you for taking the time for this important conversation. We do want to acknowledge we've got a couple folks on Zoom today. We've got Nicole, Valida, and is there anybody else on Zoom? Just Nicole? Okay.
Kemp is on there as well from our historic preservation plan consultant group.
Oh, awesome. Excellent. Good. Well, we will go ahead and get started. No, I think we need to wake up the PowerPoint.
This has not been my week for technology. I'll share that.
You're wrong.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, so this is our second meeting of the Encompass Navigation Committee. Today, we're going to really drill into a couple quick plan updates on where we are with the 4 plans that are all working together. We're going to provide an overview of the summer community outreach and do a little ambassador training. The first meeting that we had, there was a lot of discussion about how do we go out into the community, have some of these conversations so that we're not caught in our own echo chamber as we're talking with a lot of like-minded folks. How do we make sure that our reach is representative of the broader community? So we're going to have a little discussion about that and not spend a lot of time there because we know with the breakout groups that we did last time, those policy toolkits for historic preservation, thanks, Sam, required quite a bit of time and energy. So the second half of the meeting today is really going to be related to understanding the interconnections and the tools that we have for climate action. And on the agenda, you'll see it follows the meeting purpose. We're going to go around and do some quick introductions here in a minute, then have updates on each of the individual plans, followed by some Q&A, that summer outreach with a little bit of the navigator training. And then we'll be reporting out on our climate action tools for about 90 minutes from about 10 to 11:30. And then we'll have some next steps Q&A. I don't see any members of the public on Zoom, but if someone joins, we'll have some public comment. And then there'll be an optional lunch starting at noon. So with that, let's do some quick introductions. I know most of us know each other already, but name, any affiliation, and then the advisory committee you sit on. And really quickly, just a favorite summertime activity. So I'll start. I'm Lyle Scram, here to help the town with some of these things. I've had the good fortune of getting to know a lot of you over the years. I'm based out of Ridgeway, and I'm so excited that some of our high alpine mountain biking starting to open up. So Jesse, can you go lead?
I'm Jessie Early. I'm with the town and I'm the manager of the historic preservation plan and I love to trail run.
I'm Natalie Manning. I'm with the planning department, Crested, Butte, and with hiking.
Architect. And I just got myself in a place, so I better be like in Zoom high thing.
Gabby Prohaska, Crested Town Council. I'm on the historic preservation planning committee, and I love to hike a peak.
Andrew Zobbs, citizen. I'm on the historic preservation committee, and I like to go sailing on the Mesa.
Jim Starr, with the community plan committee, been involved with affordable housing for a long time, and hiking is my favorite activity.
Thank you, Jim.
Get Calvert and Muscle and community plan, meeting, where we sort of go that community plan. I like to go, I like bikes.
Voters and others. Bob Cunningham, most recently been involved for the last 20+ years with the museum, and on the transportation committee.
Ed Schmidt, Bozar, Education Committee, and like sitting in my family.
Bozer as well, and info committee, which I was in the and with the rotated hiking, specifically if there's a cool water hole.
Sarah McDonald, town manager. I will do anything outdoors that I can force my 13-year-old into joining me on. He's currently trying to make friends with magpies. Yeah.
Beth Goldsco, town council member, I'm also the climate action committee, and I'd say watching town meet softball.
Tommy Duvall, on Bozar and the Climate Action Plan Committee, and probably getting out climbing.
Cal Kennedy, I'm on the transportation committee, and
Eric Norman, I'm on Bozar and Historic Preservation Committee, maybe some more time activity, but getting on the river.
My name is Giza Michael. I am the GDP coordinator with the Housing Authority on the Climate Action Committee, and my favorite activity is switchback biking.
And Federty, town council, transportation committee. I like jumping in cold water.
Chris Hensley. I'm with the Adaptive Sports Center and a CB resident, and I'm on the transportation committee. And anything to get out there amongst it, whatever forms, great.
I'm Troy with the planning team, and I just like to sit here and. That's not as interesting.
So I'm Mel, I'm with the planning team as well, and typically it's mountain biking, but after last weekend, I think my new favorite is cold plunging in the lake. So, and then I do just want to acknowledge, unfortunately, Dana Lee and the town sustainability coordinator is out sick today. So I'm going to do my best to fill in for her on all the climate updates and the breakouts in the toolkit, but I'm definitely going to ask to lean on our wonderful members of our climate action plan committee to help with that today. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks, Mel. And so what we're gonna do quickly is just the updates on the 4 plans that you heard last time were much more comprehensive. Today, we're just gonna go through really what's changed since the last time we were all together, starting with some of the overarching communications tools that are being put together, and I'll hit Mel.
Yeah, so in a little bit, we're gonna go over summer outreach strategy, and in front of you, you do have brochures that are gonna be in all the Crested Butte newspapers tomorrow to really launch the summer compass outreach effort. And this is our new infographic. So you're gonna start seeing this around town, which is the compilation of all of the plans we're working on. So all the different committees you're on, transportation, historic preservation, climate action, and the community plan that all together comprise compass navigation. And you're gonna see this infographic, I believe today, on a giant banner hanging across Elk Avenue with a big QR code to take you to the website to get involved. We're gonna dive into the outreach in a little bit. First, we just wanna give an update on each of the plans. And as we talked about the last meeting, all the plans are intentionally following the community compass decision-making framework, where we're going through those intentional steps of defining our challenge and identifying the goal. Right now, the community plan is in that phase. Next is outlining a community engagement strategy. So some of our other plans that are farther along, like historic preservation, Maddie and Jesse did a lot of outreach and engagement this winter to solicit feedback, where the community plan, climate action plan, and the remaining plans are really going to be using this compass navigation effort this summer to continue soliciting more outreach. Next up is identifying success measures. How do we go about meeting the goal in a way that's aligned with Crested Butte's values? So the climate action plan is in that phase. After that, create alternatives and filter through the success measures. What are different ways of approaching the goal, and how do they meet or not meet the success measures? The historic preservation plan is in that phase, which Jesse will give an overview of those 3 alternatives in just a few minutes. The step 5, make decisions based on informed consent. And then after that, implementation. So I believe we talked about this at the last meeting, but once a plan's adopted, there's still so much work to be done to implement. So the transportation plan is in that phase now. We have 20 years of implementation actions, and that's going to take continuous outreach and engagement, and Troy will give an update on that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Troy to talk about transportation.
So transportation is in the implementation phase, so starting off with the roundabout at Red Lady and 135. The school district has been approved for expansion to Bozar under condition that they have a traffic management plan that is approved by CDOT. And staff, and there is a draft management plan in front of CDOT as well as an application for the roundabout itself. It's an access permit application. And CDOT is reviewing it and staff will be reviewing it. So with less than 40 days, we will get direction from CDOT on what they want. We have no indication that the roundabout wouldn't. They would be tweaking, how does it interface with Bellevue? How does it interface with the driveways of the school district? And that's really what the operation plan is about. So the two are going together. The town anticipates getting that in late June and then putting an RFP out for design engineers to start design in September. Taking that up to a 60% design to finalize the cost. And there's going to be a big community outreach about that and exactly how the roundabout is designed. And that will go into next year. Traffic calming, well, we have a bridge issue. So the staff expanded traffic calming on White Rock. We added the blocks between 5th and 6th, and we added 0 block up to the hill. You'll see the boxes are out there. We're doing traffic counts right now to put in a potential 3-way stop at White Rock at 6th. And so we have cameras, you may have seen the camera out right in front of the art center. We're going to be working with CDOT on what they call a warrant study to justify the stop sign or not. So you may see a stop sign that staff can put in or take out in coordination with CDOT on what it does to 6th. So that White Rock actually you can make a lot into it. So that's still the comment. We're still working with CDOT a lot more on that one. From expanding the traffic calming, council adopted a policy after the adoption of the plan. I think a drawing of that is in the packet, and we will be implementing those with the patios on June 18th or in and around there. See, Public Works has a lot to do in the spring, and they're going to be putting devices up. So we're going to actually do more than just chicanes. You'll see narrowings that are really aggressive. It's on lower volume streets that force the cars to yield. The chicane kind of indicates you might want to yield, but technically they fit between them. They won't fit between the narrowing. And so there'll be forced yields, mostly coming off of 6th as they come into 5th. There's a big problem. So we want to capture that behavior right before they do that. And then parking, council has directed staff to go ahead and maintain the summer program. So we have a contract out with Interstate to maintain parking during the summer program. And we're further evaluating the initial recommendations from staff for winter. And so we're evaluating different alternatives, and council won't adopt a winter program until we really hear from the community more. And that would be adopted in December. Implemented the parking management in December. What do we do about 6th? Council is currently split and wants more data before they either implement what was originally proposed or a modification slightly to it. And so those are the transportation updates. It's continuous. We're serious about engagement. So if you have concerns or anything, let us know.
So we're gonna keep moving through all the plans and then do a Q&A on all the plans after that. So next I'll turn it over to Jesse for historic preservation.
Thanks, Mel. So we'll hop right in.
Sorry.
So this is just a reminder of what Mel said earlier. We're following the compass framework and we're at step 4 right now. According to the compass steps, we're in phase 4, which is drafting the plan though, along with the alternatives. So like Mel said today, you'll see the 3 draft alternatives and I'll tell you how we arrived at those 3. So next slide, please. Our consultant, Ron Slonick, took all of our data. So we surveyed, windshield surveyed buildings from 1953 to 1993, just to see what do we have, to be able to make all our alternatives and decide where we're going. And so he found what we have are kind of 3 eras. The mining era, obviously from 1880 to 1952. What he calls the quiet years, which were from then 1953 to about 1970, Because things were just, even though this area opened in the early 1960s, things were still very slow in town because of the mine closing. And then that was also nationwide with World War II, all those things happening, building in general was slow during that time. So then we saw things pick up and what we're calling the recreation ski era of buildings. And from that, we have buildings like what you see, the Queen of All Saints Church here, which is, he said, is one of our most significant buildings from this era in town. It was built in 1964. And he said it is one that could be National Register eligible because it's so exact to the time period on both the outside and the inside. So it's a very special building. This picture on the side has nothing to do with the building, but it's just of that era and I found the picture. So I thought, and Boxy Spricer was a local long time local. So I never got to meet him, but I've heard people talk about it. So I'll hop into some of the classifications of buildings that Ron found that the town has. I didn't include pictures, but from that time period of 1970 to the 1990s, we have some buildings that are trying to emulate other buildings. So say like a Foursquare or something like a colonial building, which it was built in the 1970s, but it's trying to look like something else. So he wasn't representing those buildings because they aren't representing the time period that they were built, basically. So some of the buildings that do represent the time period they were built is, we have quite a few of these contemporary log architecture buildings from the 1970s. So we have a lot of log buildings from the early 1800s or late 1800s, which are more rustic log. They were buildings that the miners needed to just have it as a shelter. This is a different type of log building from the 1970s, and these are some examples from around town. We have some in the 700 blocks and then also some in the 0 and 100 blocks. So next slide, please. Then another type of architecture we have are kind of contemporary wood frame architecture. Sylvanite is an example of this, which is that 117 7th Street. Some people love it, some people don't love it, but it is a very unique building. Another example is 28 White Rock. Another would be Christiana Guest House from that time period, and 1 Maroon Avenue. So these are just some examples of buildings, and then as we get into the alternatives, I can explain how we arrived at what we arrived at. So like Mel said, we're very excited. The draft plan is going to be released on Tuesday, June 11th. It'll be part of the council packet as well, but here's some images of what you'll see, the title page and the table of contents, and just some examples of the images. So we look forward to all of your feedback once that hits the shelves next Tuesday. Next slide. Okay, so I'll hop right into alternative 1, but first I wanted to say, how did we arrive at these alternatives? We took all of your feedback from the previous committee meeting, which was so helpful. Town council, Bozar input, the Historic Preservation Committee, and then all of our feedback from, as Troy and Mel mentioned, we've had a number of community engagement events from March through April. I think we have 5 or 6. So we really took all that information, and we've really heard some consistent information about things that people were either interested in seeing or not interested in seeing. And so as you look at these alternatives, just remember, and as you look at the draft plan, what we're hoping is you think of these alternatives almost like a menu where you can pick and choose. Say you like one thing off alternative 1, but you like 2 things off alternative 2, and then 1 thing off of alternative 3. We could mash all those together to create what Troy and Mel call the Goldilocks alternative eventually. So the draft plan has all 3 of these, but we'll eventually only show 1 alternative when we hear feedback from all of you and all the public. So alternative 1, with that in mind, is kind of keeping with what we have, just modernizing some of our current policies, allowing some more flexibility with materials to recognize the climate and the wildfire risks, and then also anything with FEMA, which we might need to look into as well. further regulate for demolition by neglect for buildings within the period of significance, so 1880 to 1952. Develop a historic building and shed maintenance program. We have a lot of buildings in the alleys that we're worried start to list and lean, that maybe we could have a little program to help building owners stabilize those structures. And then you'll see with all three alternatives, the allowance of administrative review. So basically that means instead of everything going to the board or to Eric as the Mozart chair, certain things might be allowed for me as a staff member or Maddie or Hannah eventually to say it's a re-roof or say it's a shed conversion, a small shed. We have to determine what are those things, but administrative review instead of everything going to the board for review. So this next map will show what does that look like. This looks like pretty much what it looks like today. The dark purple is our National Historic District as it is today. And then the light lilac color is representative of the local historic district, which is how it is today. So as the map goes, nothing really changes as we look at the map. And then what do we expect to see as far as architecture goes with alternative one? Things probably wouldn't look much different than they look today as far as architecture go. We still have that single style guideline. You have a mix of historic buildings and the new buildings. So that's a quick overview of our alternative one. Alternative two, we preserve, again, the historic district as we have, and we will with each, but then we have a new recreation ski era from the buildings that I referred to earlier, the 1953 to 1984. Ron, our consultant, found that after 1984, the design started to change, like it was anywhere in America architecture, not just, oh, this is unique to Crested Butte, or this is unique to this time period. So that's why you're seeing that 1984. One of the other things we would do is shrink the local historic district boundary, which you'll see on the map on the next slide, to have a buffer around what the National Historic District is. We would allow for a range of styles outside of the National Historic District for, say, new construction or additions to existing buildings. But with the understanding that this new period of significance would have its own set of guidelines in some way, because we're protecting that new period of significance. And then there would be a more broad range of styles, and I'll show you some examples of architecture on the last slide for this alternative. By preserving this, we'd also look at demolition regulations for this era of buildings as well, not just the historic district. And then incentives, if you own a building from this 1953 to 1984, what kind of incentives for, say, setbacks or height or width might be allowed to allow an addition where you might be hemmed into a corner if you weren't allowed those incentives. And then again, the administrative review for this.
And administrative review may expand.
Exactly.
Expand beyond
Yeah,
just.
there might be
small scale
additional
stuff.
law.
Right.
So the map, as you can see, we still have the National Historic District in the dark purple. The light purple is that buffer that I mentioned. And then the properties in orange are the properties that represent that 1953 to 1984. The one thing we revised from just looking at purely architecture was in our last committee meeting for the Historic Preservation Plan. Molly, who's actually not here today, mentioned, what if we looked at also not just architecture from this time period, but when things shifted from building what would be a home or a smaller footprint of the ski recreation ski era to wanting to maximize the square footage, wanting to just build as much as you can build on a lot. So we looked at these orange properties represent buildings that haven't maximized their FAR as compared to what's allowed in the code. So it's a mix of architecture and also the footprint of the building that's represented on that map. And again, this period of significance isn't like our current period. We wouldn't have a whole buffer around that area. It's individual sites would be preserved. And as part of this, we're notifying all those property owners to just say, hey, this is being discussed. We're gonna have a focus group or a information section so that they can ask questions about what this might mean for them. So that's alternative two's map. And then what would architecture look like? When I said there's a range of styles, this would be something that's determined when we kind of nail down what does this alternative look like if this is what we go with. We'd probably see styles from Art Deco maybe, or Craftsman, bungalow style. The styles you're seeing up here, or if someone else had a different style from around Colorado that they wanted represented, we could look at that as well. But not the out of the box contemporary modern maybe, or something like that. So alternative three then would be, we would only have the National Historic District, the mining district from the 1880 to 1952. Shrink the local boundary to around the buffer like you saw in alternative two, but only one period of significance. And then outside of the zone district, or outside of the National Historic District and the buffer area, we would allow for carte blanche with style. We'd have standards and guidelines for mass, scale, and form to make sure that we're sticking to the success measure for the historic preservation plan, but we'd allow more of a range, because we've heard from people, we want flexibility. Well, alternative one or alternative 2 and 3 say, well, how much flexibility do you really need? Do you really mean anything goes as long as mass, scale, and form? Or do you want things to be kind of in a little bit more of a box as far as flexibility goes? The other things we would look at, instead of regulating demolition for that second period of significance, like you talked about in alternative 2, we'd only be regulating for the historic buildings for this one. Again, I didn't mention it all on alternative 2, but all these alternatives assume we'd allow more flexibility with materials. So we'd look at what materials need for a climate action plan for the wildland fire codes, and then FEMA. So all of these alternatives kind of address that. And then finally, again, the administrative review regarding certain projects, whatever projects we deem all right. So the next slide is the map, which again, the orange is gone. So this just represents the National Historic District with the buffer. And then, so you can imagine just with more flexibility, I tried to pick images that were more relational to our scale of town. I think sometimes I found lots of images of huge ginormous buildings, but they might not really be relational with our town laws and FAF requirements. So these are a little more relational. So that's all.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah. And then move into that.
When is the report going and when is comment period closing?
Right, so it'll go public next Tuesday, June 11th, and then we'd love to hear comments back by July 5th, is the deadline, Friday, so.
Thanks, Jesse. I'm gonna move next into an update on the climate action plan. So the climate action plan is being developed in 4 phases. Right now, we're in the second phase of identifying success measures, starting to move into alternatives, which will kick off today with the toolkit exercise, and then doing lots of community engagement this summer. So I want to give an overview. Part of the first phase was doing a greenhouse gas inventory to understand what are the greenhouse gases that the town and community of Crested Butte within our boundaries are producing. So it can help inform us, where are those greenhouse gases coming from, and then what are really our biggest levers of what do we control, what do we have the most impact on to work on. We presented the draft greenhouse gas inventory report to the town council on Monday at a work session and got some really great feedback where we're gonna do some refinements on framing of the inventory, making it easier to read and understand for the typical person. And then also recognizing that the kind of climate action sustainability industry has really been evolving, and the methodologies of calculating these things have really changed a lot, even since the town's last inventory in 2017. So we're going to be doing some work to really try to see how can we better have an apples to apples comparison from this inventory, the 2017 inventory, to see what our progress is. But for the sake of today, I think the biggest takeaways so far from the inventory is that the bulk of our emissions as a town and community are from our buildings and energy use. So 90% is coming from our residential, commercial, municipal buildings, and then the amount of energy and then where that energy is coming from. So that's around 90%. That's followed by transportation. I believe that was around 7%, and then other at 3% is waste. So waste, and then water and wastewater. So keep that in mind as we get to the categories on the toolkit a little bit later. Going back to the compass, the first step and really of the compass framework is defining the challenge and goal to set out for what is the challenge we're trying to address and what is our goal for the climate action plan. So in the compass, we recognized in our strategic plan that we're really seeing the impacts of climate change, and we want to do our part to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions while also preparing and knowing we need to adapt to the changes that we know are coming. We also took a lot of feedback and worked with the Climate Action Advisory Committee on really what is the challenge. And this is a tough challenge because it's very existential and global in so many ways, but how do we wrap our arms around what is the challenge for Crested Butte? So we heard a lot of feedback from climate change poses threats to our quality of life. The urgency of climate change is here and intensifying. There's a complexity in how reducing emissions continues to evolve. We know local action is impactful, but it can take time to really demonstrate results. And we know we need a renewed and integrated approach to climate action. So what we're doing with the feedback from the council is trying to take all the great feedback we've heard so far from the community and the committee, and how do we refine this into a really simple, concise challenge statement for the climate action plan, where some of the key takeaways from the council were it's urgent, we want to do our part, and we need to adapt as well. Next up with the goal. So the draft goal statement that was developed by the Climate Action Committee is that Crested Butte will act on the urgency of climate change by setting the example of what is possible for mountain communities to take responsibility for our climate impacts and strategically drive down Crested Butte's greenhouse gas emissions. So this goal really stems from those compass values of accountable and bold. We want to be accountable and doing our part to strategically drive down our emissions, but we also want to be bold and recognize we are in a unique position as a small town to set an example of what's possible. And our building code and electrification requirement is a good example of that. But we were the first municipality in Florida to do that. Now a lot of towns are saying, hey, they did it. How can we do it too? And following suit. What you'll notice is this goal is not a quantifiable number or something like that to reach towards. And that was intentional through discussions with the council and the Climate Action Plan Committee, where there's kind of two different approaches to goal setting. You could do a top-down goal approach where you might see in other towns, hey, we want to reduce our emissions by X amount by this year. And that's the goal at the beginning, and the plan tries to get you there. Where what the council and the committee wanted to do is, hey, let's take a bottom-up approach. We know we want a goal to be bold and accountable, but let's really do some action impact analysis. Let's come up with alternatives on our toolkit, see what levers and dials we have, and see where that gets us in reducing our emissions and back into maybe a more quantifiable goal there. And maybe that's in the goal, maybe that's in the success measures, but we're really taking that bottom-up approach. Moving into draft success measures. So the committee recently came out with a set of draft success measures that are still in draft form. So we're going to take council's feedback, and then through several engagement events this summer, we're going to work on refining these. But what we're looking at is kind of a two-tier approach of success measures, where first with any action, we want to understand, does it either meaningfully reduce the town or community's emissions, or does it set the example of what's possible, show strong leadership, or has strong community support? An example of these two differences could be how maybe something that electrifying the town's fleet. That's kind of a best practice for climate action, but it's not it's actually meaningfully reducing the town's municipal emissions. But it's not that kind of sexy front page headline thing you see that shows leadership or shows something bold and new. But it might be something that needs to be done. Where the other side is our building code. We know for electrifying buildings going forward, that's a very incremental change, and we're not going to see huge impacts on our emissions of that for a long time, but it's something that really set the example of what's possible and showed leadership. So we wanted to try to account for accountable and bold within those success measures. And then the idea is if an action meets either of those, we want to understand for that action to be successful, is it being proactive before being reactive? Does it leverage community and regional initiatives and partnerships? Does it provide significant co-benefits? Does it provide a benefit, say, of public health or something like that? Or maybe a benefit with some of the town's other goals, like transportation is such a great example where transportation could really help reduce our emissions, but it also provides benefits of community connectivity, that kind of Crested Butte feel and that sort of thing that we love here. And then providing a meaningful return on investment is the last one. So again, these are in draft form. We're definitely going to take council's feedback and any other feedback you have or from the public this summer to continue to refine these. And then this is just going to be a quick preview. We're going to dive into the climate action toolbox in a little bit as we get into our breakouts later this morning, but our next step from there is to start to move into alternatives. So similarly with the historic preservation plan, we really wanted to start with a toolbox to wrap our arms around with what are the levers and dials of what does the town have control and impact over when it comes to climate action. So these were broken down into 4 categories of energy supply, building energy use, waste, and transportation. Again, these all tie back to that inventory as well, where our emissions coming from. So this is what we're going to be diving into today, and in just a little bit, we'll go through each category to explain.
Mel, here the orange line represents existing conditions, right?
Yes, the orange is where we are today. So as we prime you all for the breakout groups, we'll talk about where are we today and then what could dialing up or dialing down potentially look like using some examples from other communities. And then lastly, I know I've been talking a lot, so I think there's just a couple slides left, but an update on our community plan. So we are in the discovery phase where we're doing a lot of data collection and analysis and starting to define the challenge and the goal statement. We have a lot of data to still collect and analyze. Our consultants are doing a big policy review of the town zoning code. So we're going to be continuing that discovery phase through the summer. But right now we're at the phase of defining the challenge and goal and then moving into community outreach. So through all the navigation events and the survey, we're going to be doing stakeholder interviews this summer. We're going to take a lot of feedback, which will help us into moving into defining success measures. But we did just recently have a community plan committee meeting where we started to look into drafting the challenge and the goals. So these are very much draft form and in development. But the challenge we're looking at with the community plan is that Crested Butte's losing ground on livability. We know we have a housing crisis, but livability is so much more than just housing. It's quality of life, it's neighborhood connectivity, it's secure and access to transportation, it's seeing an ability to build a future here, it's civic engagement. All those things are really starting to break down, and a big reason for that is investment in tourism serving businesses and needs are really outpacing community serving essentials. So our cost of land, our cost in construction, and our code that facilitates or sets the blueprint for development is making those tourism serving needs the highest and best use and return on investment, where those are really starting to outpace those needs for affordable and attainable housing, community essential serving businesses, local serving businesses, and things like that. So we're at a place where an evaluation of our development regulations are needed to ensure they can better guide the market to balance those community serving needs within that tourism-based economy. So our draft goal here, which I really want to thank our committee members for helping to work through this last week. We're still going to work on refining this. It's still a bit long. But our draft goal so far is to leverage the town's development regulations and community resources to facilitate and incentivize the market to better balance community serving needs of affordable housing, essential services, and local businesses within a tourism-based economy to ensure Crested Butte can be a well-functioning, livable, and thriving community while maintaining its authentic small town feel. And this really comes back to those two compass strategic values of how do we enable people who live and work here to thrive while accommodating growth in a way that maintains our small town rural feel. So how do we balance those things? And that's a mouthful. So any wordsmiths in the room, come see me after, and we're going to continue working on refining this. So that was a lot of talking. So let's move into a Q&A.
Thank you, Mel, and that was a lot of updates, a lot going on, and I would have never known that Mel wasn't leading the climate action plan. But any questions you have for climate action, we'll make sure get back to Dana as well. So what observations, questions, comments do you have on where we're at? Yeah.
Oh, great progress. My questions are related to the climate action plan. One sort of a detailed curiosity question, and the other is a more macro level. It said, you had a little metric that said emissions had increased 18% from 2017 to 2022. And I'm wondering, 90% is buildings across all sectors. Do we know the correlating growth in square footage of buildings? So in other words, are we making more or less emissions pound for pound? It would be interesting to know. And then the second observation and question about the climate action plan is, and I never thought 10 years ago, never imagined myself saying this, but there is a perspective which says we're kind of too late and we should reduce emissions, and that's great, but we also need to prepare to survive. So I didn't really see a resiliency component of that, and I'm worried that it's gonna be part of the plan.
Those are great questions. Thank you. On the inventory piece, so that's where we want to do some more work on framing. Because so I think to answer your question, we saw, I believe it was a 6% increase in building stock since 2017. To answer like how many more buildings did we have? But the challenge is there's a lot of different methodologies where in 2017 we didn't account for grid losses for natural gas and electricity, where this year we did. So that's where come up with how much percentage actually increased in our buildings is what we still need some more work in framing on. And then, kind of welcome. But then we also had a good question around from the council the other night, and Beth or Donnie or so feel free to chime in. Around how do we make sure to frame our inventory in a way of like, say we do with the community plan, we end up having more housing units in town where we don't just, our emissions are going up because more people are living in town. We don't want our solution to be no one's here, so our emissions are going down or no one's using electricity. So we really want to work on some more of that framing. And then the other challenge too with energy was we saw a big increase in use of natural gas in the inventory, but trying to drill down into, was that because there were really different weather patterns that year? Were there a lot more heating degree days, and trying to better understand that? Also, we want to do some more framing around how a big part of climate strategies is to electrify more, move away from gas, and then green the grid. So how do we frame it as like increasing our electricity usage? Expected to go up, it's not a bad thing. So that's where we still need some more work, but we're happy to also connect you with Dana to drill into any of the details of the inventory. But no, we're really going to be doing some work to better frame that. But I'd love to hear any
and changing it to town or person or unit is a clear direction that we've heard from everyone. And so that's part of the framing, so that we can be more specific to Crested and better understand. So those are all great questions that we need to address.
On the adaptability and resiliency piece, we heard from council and from the committee that we want to look at including that in the challenge and the goal, recognizing we need to act on the urgency, but also prepare for the changes we know are coming, where right now in the scope of the climate action plan, we're not really going to be looking at what are all the resiliency strategies that would come after through a separate plan or a separate effort to really focus on the act on the urgency piece first. But I think that's a really good question and continue the discussion of, does that fit with the goal or the challenge or the success measures? And I think that's really great feedback that you brought that up.
There's a lot of nuances to resiliency, and the current framework for Compass is after all of these plans are done and the community plan is when we get the zoning figured out and design standards and guidelines that come out of all four of these in mind. We do have sort of what we're calling a resilient community plan that is meant to follow up, right, and get the details. Because if we just did Butte, which is our wildland urban interface requirements, there's so much related to climate action, but also architectural expectations. That the climate action plan, I think a lot of it will be recommendations and observations that then the community can get their arms around after these are all done, because it really does cross over between each of the plans. And I wouldn't want one plan to dominate a conversation inappropriate, right? That it's meant to be the follow-up, the resiliency plan is meant to be. But clearly the climate action plan needs to be the leader in saying how important, so we're trying to figure what that is.
I guess just one person's perspective would be that the resilience is as urgent as the emissions.
We don't stay.
That's a great question and feedback.
To tie into, Jim,
Yeah.
it's just the 2 years. Is there plans to keep doing it annually at this point, the inventory?
I believe so. So that was a big part of updating the methodologies this year too, was to make sure it could be used in a standard modeling program so that Dana could actively keep that updated. I can get back to you and ask around whether it was planned to be updated annually or every 2 years or those details, but that was the intention, was to get it up to best practices. Yeah.
And then I think the report stated that 2022 was significantly colder, but there are specific metrics.
That's, yeah,
What's the average temperature in the winter?
that's where we're gonna be working with the consultant team to better tell that story. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any questions?
So real quick on the community plan draft statement, I think you guys are nailing it with the livability, the erosion of that. The one statement in there that I thought about is the tourism-based economy. I've never really seen Crested Butte as necessarily tourism-based. There's a lot going on here. You've got folks in healthcare, you've got educators, you've got construction people, lots of other things. You look around this room and very few of us are in actual tourism, right? So I think that could be expanded and that might take in the challenge a little bit better for everyone, you know, because tourism gets a lot of play. We're certainly a tourist town. We're never going to get paid from that, but I think there's a lot more going on here than just tourism based. I think that could be expanded to include a wider range of what's going on in town, you know. I mean, I think we're all relying on that in some way or another with our industries, but I think that is limiting in that statement, you know.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of go off that, I've been reading a lot of articles from, it seems like a lot of them are in Venice, and there's various European cities that talk a lot about over tourism. Like, are we there? Am I being ridiculous by saying that? Because it just feels that way, and I don't work in a restaurant, I'm not on the front lines, I don't own a business, I don't know how they're all doing, but like, where are we in that regard? Because it seems like for my whole life, we're trying to get people here, begging them. And it feels like there are too many, but I could be wrong. Does anybody know?
I think that's the challenge, right? We're on the teeter, and are we teetering too far? Have we gone too far? We want the challenge statement to literally raise that question. Are we too far? How should this plan try to look at our regulations to better balance it? I mean, that is the core of the question.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. It's subjective, but it's. So things are going to try and create that. The recognition, we're probably not there yet, but, yeah, it feels uncomfortable for articulation to be here.
Record is a lot bigger, so. Which is not good for tourism. You don't want to go somewhere where you're, yes, that was a bunch of people can't find parking. It's counterproductive. to its own end.
Very delicate balance.
Right.
Yeah, really good
But if
observation.
you just one thing, if you just the tourism economy, all you can do is devalue and externalize costs to your environment. People, so you're dividing basement investigations.
And I think, I would think of our zoning as us. Right, it was artificially imposed on us in 1972, probably representing somewhere in the law. Right, it was a generic zoning code. And over the years, we have evolved it, right? We've changed parking requirements, we've added our historic district requirements. And zoning codes sort of reflect. And the zoning code now, does it reflect the balance we want? Right, between livability and local economy and the tourism, so we're vibrant. It is that delicate balance, and I think the code has absolutely been silent on affordability. Because we've only really experienced that over the last 7 years, where our price points have accelerated so much. And the zoning code has never even considered it. Right, we're just starting to tweak the ADU requirements and accessory structures, but that's the lens that it is our most powerful tool to impact the future of the town. And so it is, how do we get the zoning code to best match who we are? That's really the charge of the community.
Relative to the tourism-based economy discussion, is there such a thing as a second homeowner-based economy? And if there is that something we should be considering? Because to me, I think that the summers now, it's as much providing things for the second homeowners to do as bringing in tourists. So I'm just wondering if there's any history of communities looking at that in a different way.
I think that's a great question. We can look into some other case studies on that, but I think even as Eric mentioned, it's more than just tourism-based economy. I've heard our mayor term it too as like an amenities-based economy where we have this amazing outdoor recreation, art center, all these amazing amenities that second homeowners, retirees, remote workers, visitors kind of flock for all sorts of different reasons. So how do we, what is that kind of definition of our economy? And it's also termed in Roger Kahn's book as like a recreational exurb too, as a way of why people would flock to a place like this. So we can definitely look into that more in some case studies to
That's a
better
great
define. Yeah.
And these are great challenge questions for the community plan as it goes forward, and it ties back to that list that we developed at our first meeting of the more of and the less of, the things we want to see more of in our community, the things we want to see less of, and what tools do we have to deliver those things. And so as we look at the climate action tools, but especially as we look at the community plan toolkit, as we get into that work this summer and fall, that's where we can understand our tools. And one of the, it is subjective, as Andrew said, in a lot of ways, but understanding balance, and balance is probably going to be the common theme that emerges through a lot of these conversations. But these are great challenge questions for the community plan to answer.
Question about, as a community plan member, will that stat of 70% of the emissions come from homes? Will that be, I assume it will feed into the community plan. How will that feed into it? Will that be something that we're directed to consider and how we move forward as far as code changes, things like that? Or
Yeah, it will influence the community plan, obviously. I want to sort of divorce the community plan zoning implementation from the community plan. Right, and so all four, the transportation plan, preservation plan, community plan of action are all going to be informing the zoning change next year. Right, and so I think one direct correlation is climate action and emissions of what buildings produce and insurances and their relationship to costs. Because obviously climate action wants to reduce emissions as much as possible, community wants to make it affordable and livable. And what is that right balance? And I don't think the community plan is going to trump anything. It's how do we take that information and decide next year if it's not. But we certainly want to hear from the community
on how important affordability and livability is, just as much as we hear from the climate action plan, how important it is to reduce emissions. So that's really a zoning code that the entire community will be a part of too.
And Jim, I think to your point too, already knowing we have this community plan, we want more people to live and work in town, enable them to thrive. That's already starting to influence climate action. We heard from council this week, hey, let's be careful and not just say we want to reduce our emissions by X amount by this year, because what if that works against us if we get more people living in town or more buildings in town or something like that? So I think we're already starting to see that crossover when it comes to framing and goal setting, but it's going to be important to really keep that in mind as we move forward too.
I think one thing that we have to consider, one, the term tourism isn't a bad word. Whatever you want to call it, whether you want to call it attracting people, whether you want to call them short-term tourists, long-term tourists, or resident tourists, we started around the room by most of us. There was one slug that likes to lay in his hammock, but everyone else liked to go out into our amusement park. If we were Disney's board, we would be very concerned about Pirates of the Caribbean. We'd be very concerned about, is the ride viable? Is it something that people want to still come to? As we look at climate action, that is our Pirates of the Caribbean. That is why people come here. And while I agree, there are other things that come from that, healthcare, Center for the Arts, it all starts there. And it isn't a bad thing. Tourists are not a bad thing. People that come here and stay here for the summer or for the winter are not a bad thing. We benefit greatly from that. And I think that what we have to do is respect that in our protection of our attraction, it's climate. It is the environment. It is the trees and the trails and the rivers and the streams. And we have to respect that. And it isn't a bad thing to say, well, the tourists come and use them. Of course they do. It's beautiful. Why would we use them? We love them. And it's something that we have to be careful of. Yes, the maintenance of our amusement park requires affordable housing. It requires livability. It requires access. And I think to assume that there is a tipping point at which point tourism gets overused, because this place is here forever, we just have to manage that, right? We don't want to be, there was an article I read today of a house in Colorado that sits on the top of the largest waterfall in the state. What knucklehead let them put that there? I think at the end of the day, that amusement park wasn't managed really well. I think we have to consider, and if it's offensive to refer to our surroundings as an amusement park, it's beyond it. It's intended to be offensive.
That's a great
Oh,
observation.
It's not, it's like, yeah, sure, one tourism is good, but you can't manage it, that's, and it is that. The goal is always to manage it. If you can't manage it, stop.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder too to think back to the compass where that authenticity value, visitors come here for that authentic and unique experience. So how do we make sure we maintain that? And it connects to historic preservation, it connects to everything we do. How do we maintain our authenticity and not just become a Disneyland? So I think that's a great observation.
This leads into an ask we're gonna make you fast. This is why we're planning this town so long. Right, this is why we're going to, this is why we're doing this. What is that analysis? And how do we best manage it? And it is certainly not council's job to do it. And so we're being tasked with the outreach, and we're asking you to help us with. And being an ambassador to ask these exact questions, I don't think there should be ever an intent that tourism is not respected in that. And I think that's a very good statement, and however we frame this, it's not. But we need to balance it, and so that's literally why we are here. That is the toughest part of this. What is the balance?
I think part of the conversation that we had at our last meeting too was the integration. Part of what we discussed was a little bit of the cultural changes happen from the second home to your music and the nice, we're very, very. And maybe a little less than that, because our population has grown and a lot of the second homeowners come here and they recreate and they do certain things, but they're not as invested in volunteering for the center of the arts or volunteering for these events that happen when you're long. And how do we change that so that they feel invested in this community in the same way that they have historically? Because so many times they were the backbone of our boards and the fundraisers and so many things that are going on that a lot of those nonprofits are having challenges with just finding volunteers. So if we can additionally engage that second homeowner that comes here and identifies as being a resident, they don't consider themselves truly a second. And I think that's like the first gate, because they also bring friends and family here who are more, temporary, and they're able to communicate to them the cultural practices that we want to preserve here. So I'm not entirely certain. I think there's like the open-ended question, how does that happen?
Yeah.
Right, because we can't zone that.
I want to piggyback on that too. Can we work with CBMR to have church groups again instead of the fraternities that the last couple of years? Right. I love the church groups.
Question, well, did you have?
Not all sorts of creative people.
Exactly.
There's a long history of, monocultures fail. They get infected and they collapse. And right now, this community, has not been able to manage tourism over the past 20, 30 years effectively. And that's evidenced by lack of affordable housing, by the fact that we have served and servers and, and then in that structure, there's winners and losers. And in order to manage tourism, we need to have viable alternatives to creating life and supporting the family. And I'd like to think that I always do take exception when I hear SBU described as a tourism-based economy or a tourism destination. That to me undermines all the other things that we are. We don't need to be one thing. And we need to provide viable paths, to the middle class, to letting people have a life here. That's great.
And this is a great example of the thought starter question we had when folks were walking in of what are the important conversations that we need to be having about our future, and how do we have those hard conversations in a way that's productive and civil, where we can sit down and have a cup of coffee or beer and maybe agree to disagree on certain things, but find those common ground elements too, where we can move it forward. And to keep us on agenda, I think we'll compress that area, but Flo, I want to make sure we get to you before we do that.
This has nothing to do with the whole major all thing. It's minutia detail and a hopeful suggestion. But just from my experience, I am hoping that the parking person doesn't give parking tickets out until you paint the sidewalks and the streets, because he came to give a parking ticket to a gal who was on a tour and was parked right in front of the museum. The lines were not there, and he said, "You're not allowed to park here." And there was no yellow line or stripe to show that she shouldn't. And I fortunately just kind of smoothly talked to the guy, "Would you please allow her, because she's on my tour. And would you please wait until you give these?" So I know this is a stupid thing, but since there's staff here, please paint these things before the summer tours come, so that we can actually say, "Look, here's a yellow line, you're not allowed to park here." Sorry.
That's great, thank you. The painting will be happening on Tuesday, June 18th.
Hurricane enforcement doesn't start.
Perfect, thank you so much, I feel so much better.
But somebody was enforcing.
I may have been a police
Last,
officer.
no, it was the,
Yeah,
it was the parking ticket dude from Montrose or whatever.
But just.
but not this
That was
year.
last summer,
Oh,
sorry, but I was
Yeah.
just trying to prevent
yeah,
That's great.
negative tourism.
absolutely.
Thank you. Let's go, Jason, and then.
And I'm not sure how my thought right now fits into this whole discussion, but it brings up like with, the middle class being able to stay here. One thought that, and you know, just with these important conversations, one thing is that is driving people out of this, city is, property taxes. So they've gone up so much, and not for affordable housing, the folks in the, for like middle class people in regular housing. Property taxes have gone up so much that it's just, like, it's driving people out of town. So I don't know what this planning process can do anything about this, or I just. I think it's a state thing. It's determined.
We have a little bit of it in town, but it is a state.
Right, but like, in terms of also the influence, in terms of influence. Isn't a big part of it, values that have gone up?
Right, that are.
Right.
It's put a deed restriction on your house, and values, your property tax would be less. Right, and we also are voting for library, fire district, and forest. I mean, it's just sales taxes and equity, right? So this is a very important thing we all need to be aware of. And where the community plan is just gonna describe the vision and start outlining its own. It's not the cure-all for everything, so it's, but I do think we need the community to be aware of these things as council or the county or the state makes those decisions.
I just wanted to throw something out, because this is kind of what we also discussed in our community planning. That I threw out, and it was, I think, a little contentious, but to your point about tourism economy, there is a reality, which is that Elk Avenue, pretty much 90% of the businesses there are visitor-based businesses. My gallery, like, almost zero locals there. It's second homeowners and it's visitors, and that's true across the board. So to your point that we need to have, you know, a diverse economy, and we do. Town specifically has a very visitor-based economy. That's just the reality. And so part of the question is, do we need an additional business district that allows some of the businesses that are struggling because they're more essentially based businesses on Elk Avenue to have an outlet? Do we, you know, the question I throw out is, do we make Bellevue a second? Do we start building that up so that there's some viability there for some of the businesses that are now potentially going to leave Elk Avenue because they can't afford the rents? So there is a reality that we have to deal with, which is that Elk Avenue businesses are basically interested. And if we don't have them here, and we have long off seasons, then, you know, we're going to see a lot of closed doors, and the essential businesses can't afford those rents anymore. So that's just the hard, you know, the hard facts of the data.
Yeah, and I think this discussion is a perfect example of how you all know how to have the hard conversations. A lot of times when we're in these meetings, we all have discussed, you know, it's great that everybody here is so like-minded. How do we get out in the community and have some of those hard conversations? And so to keep us on agenda, we were going to spend some time having the conversation that we just had. So you all were way ahead of us, but we did have a few minutes before the meeting started to pull a couple of our council members aside and Gabi and Beth, because you all are on the front lines and having these conversations all the time. And Gabi, I know that the anecdote you shared with me this morning is perfect for some of this. So I didn't want to move on until you all had a chance to describe, you know, how you manage some of these conversations. And then we'll get into the tools that you all have to talk about some of these conversations with the community as we move forward this summer. So I didn't want to move on without giving our council a chance to share a couple of anecdotes on this.
I will just jump in really quickly because as I told Miles, I was having this conversation in my head on the walk, on the ride over today. We get hit all the time, you know, you walk down Elm and people are like, so the parking, the roundabout, you name it. And the conversation I was having with myself, and there's no answer. But the struggle that I have is I feel like we do listen to people who have different views, but how do we impart the idea that listening to people doesn't mean we're going to do what they say? It means that's part of the conversation, but there are other people who have differing ideas, and how do we help people to feel heard, even though the decisions being made do not reflect their opinions, like. Yeah, so it's more just a setting of, that's my struggle, is I want people to feel heard. But that doesn't mean that what they think is the most important thing is what's going to be done. Because we're making decisions for everyone and for way down the road.
Your responsibility is for the collective, not the individual.
Right,
How-
how do you
Yeah.
let someone feel heard?
Yeah. In that, exactly.
This
I think
process.
engaging them, like inviting them to engage in the process as much as possible, like coming to town council meetings, even if it's just online, so that they can understand the complexity of the decision-making process that you're engaged in. And so then they can see like, oh, mine is just one of like 31,000 things that you guys are considering. And you're gonna get forward. I think that's the only true way to do it.
I think though I mean, when that has that problem and that solutions, then I've offered that to community members. There's been the point of view that the only, which I don't agree with, but this is what that back to me is that it's a privilege to be able to have the time to engage, and that there's a lot of people in our community who are so deep in raising kids or making money or any other number of things that they don't have the ability to step out and engage, and so they feel left out and not heard because they can't take time off to do all of these things. You know, I mean, we all work, we all do lots of things and multiple jobs and wear a lot of hats, so we understand that it's, you know, a sacrifice you have to make for certain things to have that time. But I think that the engagement is a hard thing to come back with people about, because they would engage if they had the ability to reshuffle their lives, but when sometimes it's hard to reimagine the way of interacting. And so it's hard to just say, you know, call us, get back to us. You know, I recently had some feedback from a business owner on Fifth Street where we're changing the parking. We didn't hear from anybody, but they have an opinion. Like, well, why didn't you respond to that letter? What did we ask for it? You know, so there's things there because people are busy. And so it's a hard solution because there are so many people who can't access time.
But I would bet that if you went back to that business, the day that the meeting is gonna be or the day before, and you personally invited them to just join in and listen, that it would be different.
But I mean, they have. I don't think it changes so much.
I think it's seeking consensus versus recognize all you're gonna get is consent. And can you communicate, I heard you. And you got 75%. Because I have to balance that with other people who also got 75%. And there is no answer. It's engage, be a part of the process. Our job is to try to get them as much opportunities to be aware that this is going on. But I think the fact that you're asking that, you're the perfect person for that position because you're feeling the struggle. And just conveying that empathy and encouraging them to come in, but I think Anna's exactly right. It's really hard to get them in.
It's true, but at that point, when you have offered it and made the effort, it then goes back to them, right? Because when they're doing that engagement, they're putting it on you. This is, I'm telling you what I want, and then you go out and do it, right? Once you invite them and they don't come in, then it becomes their responsibility again. They were absent in their own, you know, life in that moment. It wasn't important enough to them, so therefore, you know, you're putting it back on their table, basically.
And
I
then,
think that's a great segue into going over all the different ways people can engage in this effort this summer with just a quick overview, but then really ask of you all. Your reach is so much farther than ours. We've heard, oh, we don't want to talk to staff, they're negative, they're scary. So how we want to talk about too, how can we empower you to be ambassadors? But I do want to go over all the different ways to.
really quickly too on
Yeah.
that one, Mel, I think too, it's another dimension of this is that outreach is often viewed as a panacea. Well, just more outreach. And the reality is it's never enough. And what we need to do is have a variety of different mechanisms where we can meet people where they're at. We can help them lower the bar for engagement, so they don't have to reshuffle their lives to engage. And it takes all of us, it takes a village, and, you know, it's, the onus is gonna be on the planning team and staff to share the information and the tools that we have. But that's one of the dimensions that it's really hard, and to Roxanne's point, if we can get to a place where there are so many opportunities to engage, and the onus really is on the individual to engage and share their feelings, and we've provided many different avenues to do that. That's trying to find a sweet spot, because outreach is never gonna be the panacea that cures everything and gets everybody to 100% consensus. But if we can find that common ground and use it to build goodwill that we need to forge compromise, that's where some of the true community collaboration is, and that's what we're trying to get to.
I think Troy made a really important distinction between consent and consensus, which is huge. And I remember, you know, when you were running council, you know, for me, you had one of the, you took some positions that were potentially unpopular, and you had a platform. You know, and so you won my vote because of the clarity of the platform. And I think there's a tendency for people with authority, like the town council here, to try to play all sides, but sometimes, you know, we need to put a little old-fashioned electoral politics behind it, stake out a position, defend the position, and if you don't get the consent, you know, somebody else is gonna get elected.
I think that is such a great point and reminder, and I feel like you might hear out there, oh, they have their decision made, why would I show up, or why are they doing this with parking, or why are they doing that? And I think it all comes back to, in your discussions, hey, we're asking the question, we have all these things we want to see more of, we want to see less of, we have all these goals, and it's gonna be hard decisions and uncomfortable conversations to get there. We're asking the question of the community and putting it out there, not just, it's like either we're gonna ask the question and work through it together, or we're just gonna let the change happen to us. So how do we really work through that and approach that in our conversations with the community? I think you brought up such a good point of like, hey, maybe Anna maybe scared some people away with their platform, but actually having a platform and saying those hard things won your vote. I think that's amazing to hear. So grab the brochure in front of you. That is your toolkit of all the different ways for you and different people to engage this summer. So our kind of tagline for this and what you're going to see on the banner on Elk is get informed, take the survey, and stay involved. So get informed means you can go to the Compass Navigation webpage, learn all about all the different plans, which have all their own pages, sign up for email updates, which Maggie sends out monthly. We're gonna have a navigator toolkit on there, and then really get informed on what this whole navigation effort is. So when you fold it open, it explains what all the different plans are, how they relate back to the compass, and where each plan is in its planning process. Take the survey. We made a very comprehensive survey that's linked to on the website. It's in English and in Spanish that really asks the community, what do you want to see more of and less, more of in Crested Butte? What do you want to see less of in Crested Butte? And then with each of the plans, it essentially breaks down the various toolboxes into an easier to understand way and asks, do you want to see more action on this tool, less action on this tool? Crested Butte's doing enough. I feel neutral, or I don't understand the issue. So that can really help us through all these plans. Do we dial things up? Do we dial things back? Do we need to better inform, better educate, better explain different things? It's a very comprehensive and a little bit of a long survey, but mostly multiple choice. So please encourage folks to take it. And that is going to be open from today through Labor Day. So there's plenty of time. You can start it, you can think about it, you can come back to it. And then stay involved. It really takes all of us. So just be like, you took the survey, but maybe you talk to someone at an event, talk to staff at Alpenglow, go have coffee with a council member, keep following the website and the community engagement newsletters to see how each plan progresses. So we're really trying to provide many opportunities for folks to stay involved in different ways with going to the people. So Thank you to all of our amazing town council members for offering to do coffee with a council member. So we have several dates throughout the summer in there where at Rumors or the Daily Dose, the council member will be there. You can go ask them anything, talk about any of these plans, and then town staff is gonna hit the streets and be at various events from the town picnic this Friday to Alpenglow, the post office, softball games, so you can come engage with us there. I promise we're not that scary. I think you all know that, but please encourage your friends. And then on the back page, we're hosting several events too. So we're partnering, I'm really excited to partner, thank you to Gabi, with the Public Policy Forum on June 18th. Dana and is partnering with Mount TV to host a climate summit. We're going to be organizing 4 block parties in the 4 different quadrants of town to have fun, get to know your neighbors, but also engage, inform, and solicit input on all of this stuff. We're also going to have a Mountain Express bus at each one with a transportation station for all your transportation questions and feedback. And then lastly, in September, we'll be having a big community design charrette here at the Center for the Arts for the community plan. So we're taking a big approach to really get the word out. So we're doing all of our communications with the brochure, the website. We want to work on an editorial series with the Crested Butte News. If any of you are interested in participating in that, please come talk to me. Being on KBUT, and then our think tank campaign, we're going to have posters out with QR codes to all the survey and some good questions from those in all the bathroom stalls in town and all across town. We have the survey, which has overarching themes that targeted planned feedback. Ambassadors, we really want to lean on you all to help us get the word out. So we'll talk about that in a second. And then going back to meeting people where they are and hosting events. Yeah, and I'll turn it back to Miles to talk more about the ambassador piece.
Excellent. Well, and we'll share this out in this whole presentation with all of you. So we're not going to read over all of this, but this was your list from the last meeting that we had. And as you heard Mel talk about, the survey that is in the field was really calibrated based on the more of, less of, and it takes it a little bit deeper, asking the community what they want to see more of, what they want to see less of. Our list really sorted itself out with a lot of overlap into 4 categories: the environmental accountability, and we'll take a closer look at this one today as we get into our climate action policy toolkit to think about, with those tools, how do we adjust the dials and pull the levers to get us more of the things we want to see more of and less of the things we want to see less of. For the broader conversations with the community that we've talked so much about today, there's a lot of thematic overlaps on some of the balance issues and what is the balance between tourism and over tourism? How do we make sure that we respect our place and, make sure that it's not viewed and used as necessarily an amusement park in a negative way. So there's a lot of good themes here that were very helpful and you'll see reflected in the survey. We did have this conversation really already today, and we were able to give Gabi and Anna and Beth a heads up that we were going to put them on the spot. But for Kent and Malika, I wanted to make sure, now that you've heard the conversations, that you had an opportunity to share any thoughts you had in this place too. And I'm sorry we weren't able to give you a little forewarning.
About anything working through.
Well, we want to acknowledge it and Malika.
Yeah, also, I don't have anything to add. Yeah, I think. I'm sorry. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for your leadership and wanted to acknowledge that before we move on. So the bulk of the discussion today is really getting into some of those breakouts, and you'll remember the format of the policy toolkit from the work we did on historic preservation. But just to recap quickly on the purpose, it's identifying what the tools we have at our disposal are as it relates to climate action for the focus of today's discussion, while also acknowledging they are intertwined, they are interconnected. There's going to be a lot of relationships that exist between the different tools that we evaluate. Ultimately, we want to look at them as a means to deliver things we want more of, things we want less of in our community. So understanding how we use those tools, mapping the interconnections, and really using them so that we can find that balance and live our values. So again, this was just in the frame of our values. popping out the big themes from your list of more of, less of, that we're gonna be rounding out with a lot of additional input from the community this summer in that survey Mel mentioned. But as a summary, the things that we wanted to see action on were more action on climate action, whether it's energy efficiency, electrification, retrofit of existing building stock. A lot of those things you'll see pretty directly reflected in the policy toolkit that we're gonna look at in a minute. More greenery on Elk, some of those streetscape choices, smaller homes, local food and waste management are all things we wanted to see more of in the environmental space. Things we wanted to see less of were reliance on fossil fuels and the greenhouse gases they produce, less food waste and takeout containers, less lights at night and light pollution, less watering of non-native plants, more water conservation, less natural disasters and more resiliency to manage them, because that's a big ask, Yeah, exactly. So the toolkit, and that's a perfect segue, the toolkit is really gonna drill onto the things we can control. Resiliency, yes, we wanted to include this one because obviously it's something we all wanna see less of. We really have very little influence, if any, in that space, but we can harden and make our communities more resilient to those risks that are out there. And then dog poop, we found this sliver, it's a very small portion of our greenhouse gas, but it does affect air quality, so we wanted to put that one in there for a little levity as well. So that's just a lens to look through as we fine tune our mixing board, that we could use the analogy last time. If we pull down on the energy supply lever and push up on the building and energy use lever, what sound does that produce? I think the challenge that we'll all have as we get into the toolkit that Mel's gonna walk us through is, when it comes to climate action, I think there's gonna be a tendency is, why don't we just crank everything up to 11, given where we are today? So we'll need to think about some of the trade-offs, the costs of infrastructure, for example. But with that, I hope that sets us up to the policy toolkit discussion.
Thank you, Miles. So the focus of our breakouts today is going to be our climate action policy toolbox. What we are going to do differently today than last time is break each group into a different topic. So don't worry, you won't have to work through the full toolbox. I know that was a lot to work through last time. There are so many things that we as individuals at the globe or organizations or businesses can do to take action on climate. But what this toolbox does is really looks at what are our levers, areas of control and areas of influence as a local government, as a municipality. So this is broken down into 4 categories: energy supply, building energy use, waste, and remember those all tie back, and transportation, those all tie back to where our emissions are coming from in that inventory. What you'll see here is transportation is opaque with a reference to the transportation mobility plan, and recognizing we have a very comprehensive transportation mobility plan and strategy, which really syncs and aligns with our climate action goals of de-emphasizing cars and reducing single occupancy vehicle use. And then it also looks into our EV transition, and the town of Crested and Mount Crested are also working on an EV readiness plan too. So Troy's gonna walk us through where we are on that, not to say we can't touch that, we can't go into that, but we just want to recognize, hey, we do really have a strategy. Let's focus on these other areas today. So I'm going to walk through each to give some context before we get into our breakouts. So first up is our energy supply. Where is our energy coming from? And this is some split out into purchase and invest or advocate. Where purchase and invest is more, we have more control over this. Where advocate is more, we have influence over this. So where we are today is right now on the purchase and invest, we are subsidizing renewable energy infrastructure. So we're facilitating a grid scale, utility scale solar project by providing land for that and supporting that project and working with GCA. There are ways to dial up or dial this down. So dialing it all the way down could look like we don't invest at all in renewable energy, let it come to us. We could, up from that is we could purchase renewable energy credits. So we do that for the town's energy use. We purchase renewable energy credits from GCA, and then dialing it all the way up could look like, do we become our own municipal utility, provide our own energy to our residents? So for example, the city of Gunnison has their own municipal utility. And remember, through all these, there's trade-offs of resources, the investment of certain things, and we need to think about where do we have the most influence? I do want to add the context too. I think it was so great how Jesse ran through all of the preservation plan alternatives. where we're gonna take all of your feedback and the community feedback this summer on how we dial things up or down and come up with different alternatives. And then we're gonna model those alternatives to see how much greenhouse gas emissions would these reduce? What would that look like? And go into questions and things like return on investment and things like that. So that's gonna be really helpful to then see where these actions can land as far as meeting our goals. On the advocate side, this is where it's important to advocate for rapid utility scale investment and change into renewable energy. So right now, where we are today is pretty close to the top. We're a member of a really powerful coalition called Colorado Communities for Climate Action. That is a coalition of, I believe, 34, maybe 40 now, state and local, local governments, cities, towns, and counties across Colorado that actually are a membership base, and they have hired lobbyists that lobby at the utility scale level, so tri-state where GCA purchases their energy from, and then at the state and federal level. And by being a part of a coalition like that, they're actually super effective. So they played a big role in tri-state committing to their energy resource plan, which commits them to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2030, which is a huge change and difference in dynamic from where we were in 2017 or 2019 with our last climate action plan, where tri-state was coal, and we were around 1/3 renewable energy, and we're really starting to see that shift. So that advocacy piece, while not something the town controls, can have a big influence. So there's ways to dial that up. Where do we do more advocacy beyond that, or dial it down? Do we say, hey, they're doing a good enough job, they're moving that direction? Do we focus our resources elsewhere? Moving next into building energy use, this category is so important. Again, 90% of our emissions come from our buildings, their energy use and energy supply. And this is so hard for any town or city to crack. How do we reduce the energy use in our existing building stock? So there are several different ways to go about this. One is with policies. So there's different things that other towns and cities are doing of building energy use policies where they require mandatory reporting or benchmarking. So for example, in places like Aspen, they have benchmarking requirements saying that commercial buildings over a certain size annually, they have to disclose their energy use. There's also ideas out there to say at the point of sale of a home, you have to disclose your energy use. And the idea behind these policies is to try to, by disclosing that and educating, it's kind of incentivizing a buyer or someone or a business owner or a building owner to say, wow, I'm spending a lot on energy. Let me look into how I can adjust that and lower it. So it's using policies to then incentivize. Right now, we're not really doing anything in that space. Building codes, this is a huge area of influence that our town and towns and cities across the world have when it comes to municipal level climate action plans, where we set building codes to regulate development and construction of new buildings, and then also additions, remodels, redevelopments, and things like that. So when it comes to new structures, we are up at the top. We adopted the 2 years ago, our new building code, which went beyond the 2021 International Code Council by adopting above code requirements as well as an all-electric requirement. But there's other ways. We're down at the bottom. You could just adopt the code as is. You could adopt the most current code, and those codes on their own are getting more efficient over time. They come out every 3 years, and we will be updating it every 3 years. So we are at the top of that for new structures. But when it comes to existing structures, this is the challenge where how do we go about, do we have leverage and influence, and we can have a lot of control over people coming in for an addition or a remodel or something like that, and how do we get them to become more efficient or maybe convert to electric? So right now we have redevelopment requirements for significant remodels. We call that level 3, where they're remodeling more than half of the space. And if you're remodeling at that level, you have to become electric ready, you have to be electric vehicle ready, you have to be solar ready and meet those sorts of requirements. But this is a place where we could dial up more, where requiring more remodel types to trigger electric code requirements, or energy efficiency requirements and things like that. And then going into programs and incentives, I want to give a big shout out to Giza for running so many great energy efficiency programs in the valley, including the town's Green D program. So programs are really important to get into our existing building stock and say, hey, we'll conduct an energy assessment for you. Our Green D program takes it further, and for all of our deed restricted housing in town, which is actually a quarter of our building stock, we will provide an energy assessment and provide energy efficiency upgrades up to a certain amount to make those homes more efficient. So on the program side, we're doing pretty well with limited incentives for deed restricted housing, but can we do more rebates, more townwide for all homes, that sort of thing? Or we could dial it back and say, hey, there's rebates out there through GCA, through the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act and things like that. We could just educate on those, let people do them themselves, or do no programs or incentives. Next up is waste. This is a category where, going back to our inventory, not a huge area of influence, but something that has historically seemed to be very important to the community as far as composting and recycling and that sort of thing goes. But the different categories in here are investment. So right now we have a municipally operated utility in the sense where we contract with Waste Management and they come and pick up your trash and recycling every Thursday. But there's ways to ramp that up where we could invest in waste infrastructure. Do we build or recycle our own recycling or composting facility? Or do we dial it all the way down and say no investments? It's up to you as a property owner to dispose of your own trash or recycling. On the regulatory side, this is split out into two categories of downstream and upstream. And this is where Dan is really the expert, so I'm going to do my best. But downstream recycling downstream waste is looking at where is our waste going kind of once it's used. So are there ways to incentivize programs of like having a pay as you throw sort of requirements to try to incentivize, hey, let's get less waste in your trash, more waste in your more recycling in your recycling or something like that. So less is going to the landfill. Right now, I believe we offer recycling and we're about to be offering a composting program. So we're kind of in the middle there, but there's ways to dial that up and down. And then upstream is essentially looking at, do we regulate things to make it so there's less waste that's ending up in our trash cans? So the state right now we're down at the bottom where the state came out with the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act. So we're starting to see statewide policies on waste of like no styrofoam containers, takeout containers at restaurants and plastic bags and things like that. But there's ways to go beyond that where we could say, hey, all of our local businesses, we're gonna require or limit that you can't give out this type of material. You can't have single-use plastic straws or something like that. And then ramping that all the way up could look like, hey, you're required to only use compostable material. So there's policies there to regulate. And then lastly, on programs and incentives, what sort of programs or incentives can we provide to reduce waste in the community? So right now we're kind of in the middle where we do a lot of education and outreach. We try to, with our town events and the town picnic and things, compost and use reusables. And then we also have a special event incentive where anyone, this is another area of influence, but any organization hosting an event in the town that's a special event on town property, we have an incentive of if you take certain measures to be climate friendly and reduce your waste, you can get reductions on your permit fees for that. But we could ramp that up and do more waste incentives and programs, or ramp it down and do nothing with that. So I know that was a lot of talking. There's one more category. I'm going to turn it back over to Troy to talk about transportation.
And this is a reminder, transportation, like all of these others, has so many variables that are influenced, life safety, right? Not really, I mean, it is a climate action thing, but there's immediate consequences to say speed, right? It's a different conversation, economic development, access to business and homes. There's sort of the conversation we've had, but I think the pace of implementation will influence council. What we have is a pretty advanced travel choice. Not only planned to practice, we have free transit to Gunnison, we have free transit to the mountain. We've invested in transit. The mobility plan to say, can we tweak those routes to best service? Can we introduce different services, say on demand? to get that first and last mile. So we're pretty high up there. The plan is also reliant on the community plan. We're not at the top of travel choices because that's really now in the venue of the community plan. Do we put more houses closer to where people work? It is a transportation decision in the framework of the community plan, right? That is the most powerful thing you can do, is eliminate the need to travel, having people closer to where they live and work. So you can start to see the relationship to other plans. So that can certainly dial up based on the community plan. The transportation plan is recommended. From a parking perspective, car reduction is a big variable in any climate action initiative. We're pretty mild on parking management. The newspaper wouldn't show that. But it's really mild compared to other cities, right? We are saying, start to investigate trouble spots. We've had a trouble spot forever at 3rd and Elk. So we implemented 2-hour parking to limit how long people park in Elk. We used to have people parking 6 hours on average on Elk. The 2 hours, turn that over. We're actually seeing more accessible parking on Elk because we're saying only 2 hours and we're enforcing it. We're limiting Maroon and Cypress to make sure they're balancing the high demand of Elk Avenue with the livability. We're now investigating a trouble spot along the corridor to deal with the skiers on big weekends and power days. And that's the debate that's going on. We could certainly dial that up based on climate action and other community goals and go into areas that we're not seeing problems right now, but actually enforce it. We could change the paid parking. There's a lot of tools that we're not employing, we're not even recommending for transportation plan. We're seeing the pushback now because every single plan will get pushed back. We're hearing it in climate action on building codes, right? Oh, the cost of putting in electrification, we're still hearing. And so the pace of implementation is a big part of this. So these can still change as the years go forward. From an EV transition, we already have building codes and that require electric ready. Going in, that was adopted as part of the building code. The transportation plan is actively encouraging origin-based EV charging. What that means is, can we incentivize homes, hotels, VRBOs, so when people do bring their electric vehicle, they never use it again. Right, they park once, they can charge at their origin and not travel around town. And so, because cars, I say this and I know people don't like it, but an electric vehicle can kill a pedestrian just as effective as an internal combustion vehicle. And so life safety became sort of the driving strategy here, rather than putting more public charging stations in. That actually invites more cars versus a destination-based EV station. So we're actually incentivizing both, regulating both. So we're actually high on EV charging in the transportation plan. We don't really want to open that plan up in terms of conversation, but obviously this process will influence the pace of its implementation. Anyways,
I just had an idea about the rumors that fly in this town, and like, can you guys put something in the newspaper that says, we are not doing this, we are not doing this, we are not doing this? Like, that's like, I just, because you're hitting ground.
How can I spend 3 hours writing that?
We're working hard on it. We're really working hard. It needs to be like bold.
I saw a comment today on Facebook, or no, it was on the Parking Vigilantes page, saying, someone was parking parallel in front of our grocery store across from the coffee shop on 4th. And he said, well, this is what they're gonna do to 3rd Street. Yeah, nowhere in the plan does it say we're doing that to 3rd Street, nowhere. Anyway, that's.
I have one more question. It's more related to this. So, the one category I don't see up there, and it's right next to the code one, it's how does Ozar's requirements affect the energy efficiency of buildings? Because just saying we're gonna use 2021 codes and like they're divorced, they're not like, they don't hold hands.
Right.
In the design of the building, they're.
So we can also, so do you mind going back to the building? I would like to better understand, this can always be improved. To take the village Yeah, so Cal, in terms of the zoning and architectural requirements, influencing, energy efficiency, can you further elaborate? Should we add a new barn?
I'm just proposing, like, is that wrapped into the code one? Can we add that in there? Because,
Give me a for instance where the architectural guidelines are in things.
for instance, you're limited to the maximum window size. So if you want to put 2 of those in, that forces you to put 4 king studs in a wall, which is a worse wall. That's a very minor example. But then, like, on Paradise Park, which I've been involved in the design of, we can't put heat pumps on the roof of a 4-unit building because it's not allowed to have a flat roof. And like, there's just weird stuff.
That's great.
That's, that we haven't come across.
So maybe we should add a bar and whoever's facilitating this.
Yeah.
So we can better understand that, and so the climate plan can influence clearly, this is in the, well, all through, it's in the preservation world. It's in the, because if we get flat roofs, we can get more livable and play with the building types and get more volume. So that's great, let's add a bar and have this group, whoever's facilitating, make sure we get these thoughts added. That's great.
And a good reminder to remember the intersections of the other plans where those 3 different preservation alternatives, 2 of them could really influence, hey, outside the historic district, as long as you meet mass scale form, there's a range of styles or there's different styles, so think back to that too. Malka?
So when we were, the town council was just recently reviewing, the project the affordable housing project. We were all, I think, shocked at how much each unit costs to build, affordable housing units. Costs over $800,000 each. In line with Hal's comments about having those our guidelines address energy issues, I think that our guidelines should also be addressing affordability issues.
Yeah, that's a great intersection into the community plan. So I think that's perfect. So we're gonna move into our breakouts. Again, this time I think we're gonna make the breakouts a little bit shorter, but your group is only gonna work on, there's 3 groups: energy supply, building, energy use, and waste. As a team, we want to hear from you. First, take a look at the toolkit, meet on the CAP representative in your group and better understand it and talk through where are we today, things, ideas to dial up or dial down. We want to see, where do you see those interconnections, opportunities, or trade-offs between the different plans? So those are great examples. Then talk as a group, how would you adjust the levers and dials? So would you ramp things up? Would you ramp things down? Do you want to share examples of ideas around that? And then lastly, how do your group's dials reflect and go back to those compass values: authentic, connected, accountable, and bold? And this is where we have to have these hard conversations of, I personally want to see this versus what is really represented those community values for the collective as a whole. So those are challenging conversations to have as a group, but remember, this all is tying back to the compass and the collective. So you're gonna have a plot with just your individual category at each group. When we come back, we want you to bring your category and use stickers or markers to put on this shared one. Where would you be at as a group? And then we're gonna share out with these questions. We're gonna have the group 1 in here, and then we have groups 2 and 3 in the classroom next door. We're gonna encourage one of those teams to go outside and enjoy the beautiful day, so you can rock, paper, scissors. Let's just do a quick time check. So let's do a 20-minute.
Yeah, I think, we'll take 5 to get settled, and then maybe at 11:30, we'll come back in for the report out.
I do want you to think of the other 2 categories as you're thinking. You want to be focused on 1 to 3. But I think the mayor brought up a point at Monday that I think we all need to just consider. What is the mission of climate action? Is it to be as aggressive as we can on emission reduction? Or is it more on resiliency and sustainability and balancing that? So just being cognizant of, what do you think the mission of the climate action is as you're looking at these? I just wanted to make sure that is a part of your conversation.
And we can go back to the previous slide too. As Troy mentioned, this is the orange line where we are today. This is the existing condition. Where we set these initial dots can and will move. We're really just calibrating right now. So this is not going to be set in stone. It's going to inform the future conversations as we go. And a key piece here is what's missing. I mean, the issue Cal brought up in aligning regulations with code. Malik is bringing up affordability, you know, if there's the resiliency piece. So if there are missing tools, we're not really looking to set these dials in stone with this group. We're looking to make sure that this model has the right tools and dials as part of it. So be critically looking at, are things missing, are things confusing? Because it's your input that will help make this much more useful as we bring it out to the broader community.
Yeah, and if, while each group is gonna be on a certain category, if you kind of wrap up and you're like, oh, let's start, if you want to talk about a different category, you're absolutely welcome to do that. So we'll leave the full toolkit up here and here as well. But yeah, so these are gonna be our 3 different groups. We'll have 1 here, 2 and 3 in the other room. And then Maddie's gonna be our timekeeper. So she's gonna give us a 5-minute warning, but we're gonna come back to report out at 11:30. And don't forget, we do have lunch provided today at 12, so we'll do our report outs and wrap up and then have a nice lunch together. Thank you all, and yeah, feel free to take a few minutes, use the restroom, fresh coffee, water. And Alita and Nicole, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording and mute, but thank you guys for joining.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you for, thank you.
That our group would put up here. So what we're gonna do for report out, we're gonna do reverse order, so group 3 first, second in the middle, either way, and then we'll end with group 1. And as groups report out, put your policy toolkit that your group did on the wall below. We'll go through and each group's gonna report out, then we'll have a bit of a roundtable discussion, and then during lunch, go up and take a look at where each group landed and help populate the shared toolkit with some stars, given the context of the discussion. If your dials move a little bit, we want to cast that. So with that, Donnie and Troy, please take it away.
All right, thanks. So our group discussed the waste impact problem discussion of our climate action plan. And I think one of the major questions that we came out of that was, how much does this really impact the climate action plan? Is the climate action plan, should that specifically be focused on emissions and other co-benefits or other social implications associated with waste could be better dealt with in a resiliency plan or sustainability plan or in some other way? Ian had a good point at the town council meeting the other night, is that the emissions from waste is just really small compared to everything else. And even if we composted and recycled everything, the emissions impact is pretty low. And so how much resources do we want to focus on that for the climate action plan? So if we were to put it in another location, I think we came up with some more benefits into how it could impact the community. Just kind of going through some of the regulatory stuff, the downstream. We looked at how more recycling, more composting is probably beneficial, and doing that kind of in a stepwise function in terms of programs and incentives, so that we can use our resources more for the higher impacting emissions building issues, stuff like that. The upstream, trying to do some more with the local restaurants in terms of their packaging for takeouts, incentivizing that so that we don't have as much waste or composting in the downstream to start with. And then, yeah, we talked a lot about investment programs. These are all kind of tied together and just like where are those resources that we want to spend the best way to kind of divvy out that. So.
And I think what we heard is also more information is needed to actually understand this benefit. So Ian may have a point, but I think you could counterpoint. And just getting data so you can be more informed as the council makes the decision. And lastly, if Waste isn't really, if the community decides that waste isn't really a big part of, let's say, a CAP. We heard clearly from our group, it's still super important. And that we want to do either a resiliency or a sustainability plan, but the proper title as an immediate follow-up is making sure we're addressing the co-benefits that aren't necessarily the most effective at climate action.
Yeah, like an example, Waste Management takes a lot of their waste to Montrose or recycling to Grand Junction or wherever that is. If we were to do it more locally, that reduces the transportation emissions. So it's not just the methane coming out of the composting and landfill, but also the whole life cycle of where are they having to transport everything to get it all done. And then if we are putting things in our own landfill, we're just that's gonna get filled up faster. So if we're able to offset that by putting it somewhere else, composting it or recycling it, then the lifetime of our landfill can be extended. And so it's not just an emissions issue, it's also a social impact issue.
I have a very specific question. How much control, if any, would we have in changing the structure of sort of pay as you throw as a disincentive to just fill up the landfill? Do we have any power with waste management and to structure how garbage is paid for?
I think what's harder though is the impact that is on the individual then.
We should be recycling and composting and.
But like you think about a business, a restaurant, the difference between those like compostable, which aren't compostable, takeaway packages and, a styrofoam is the difference between an employee getting a bonus, it's the difference between hiring someone else. Like it is a huge cost difference to the individual, even if it has a huge impact down the line. And so I think that that's the harder thing to enact than the relationship with waste management.
And Derek, can you talk about competition? So when I was in Louisville, we actually did a pay and throw program and got the market to compete. So Republic competed against Western and we got exactly what we wanted through competition. Can you talk about the competition if we put a bid out for vendors? Do we have the luxury of what Louisville and Boulder had in terms of
Sort of
competition?
two things, in terms of competition, the last 2 times, so the town is the utility for residential. So, but we contracted out. The last 2 times we've gone out to bid, we had 1 bidder. I don't know about before that. The waste management is effectively the only game in town unless we went into our own collection, which we could, right? Benison collects their own, and takes it to the landfill. We had initial conversations with waste management about pay as you throw. It's an equipment issue. That's a solvable issue. So it's the equipment on the trucks. So if it's something we really wanted to pursue, again, there's probably a cost, but it's a solvable issue.
I think the one thing with regards to waste and, after all your points is to look at who produces volume. And for me, what I see is construction waste. So there's absolutely no regulation or incentive with regards to construction waste. And while, there may not be that much building going on here locally anymore, I think that can also be a statement, a bold statement, right? And being a front runner with regards to and working with other municipalities here or in the county here in the region to do some, to level that, dial that up, specific regulation and incentive specific to construction waste. Right now, there's everything goes to the ground.
I'll just add that the BOZAR requires for certain demolitions recycling plans. So there is some sort of accountability for contractors.
Kent, Monica, did we miss anything? Chris?
I feel like, as we discussed with our group, is that we don't really have the data. Our little group didn't have the data points as to the use of town resources in terms of paying for another program versus the return on investment.
And Chris? Okay.
I think recycling is probably a negative impact. So a data question I would have is, for anything that's recycled in town, A, is it actually recycled?
Right.
And B, is there a net energy cost? Right, there's gotta be, I kind of think that the Edward Abbey School, the best thing you can do with your can is leave it on the street. Because there is no way, and so for me, the recycling column is a little bit smoke and mirrors.
The only thing I would say there is, cans actually do have a good return ROI, it's the plastics.
Yeah. Okay.
Pick up a can, leave the box.
The art program needs to take on the plastic.
And but I know it's a huge concern, rumor about what waste management does with the recycling, we ask that question all the time, we get monthly reports. They do haul it to their MRF in TJ, and anyone is welcome to tour, they love to show it off. As far as we can tell, they are in fact doing what they say they're doing, and they stockpile until they can get the right price and all of that sort of thing. They don't landfill it.
Is there a discussion within town in any capacity to continue to remove plastics from businesses in town, however it is, whether it's water bottles being sold in the supermarket, to how you're taking out your drinks?
So we're planning a council work session on that in like 3 or 4 meetings from now, so that will be up.
Town taxes nicotine, it seems like they could also tax.
Can they?
Absolutely.
Yes, we can.
Well, there's some.
Yes, we have the option for.
Whatever tax you want.
No, but you do 1,000% tax on it. Oh, it's plastic bottles.
Yeah.
We could prohibit it.
Anyway, stay for three.
Yeah, I wanted to say one more thing is with regards to waste. If it's not like one argument for looking into waste would be because if the town, it's a public, like an education thing, and people who do this stuff like recycle, they feel empowered. Like, so that's like one thing that a person can do, like an individual can do versus a lot of other things they cannot do. So I think that's why there's like that waste reduction is like a kind of something that's attractive, whether it makes sense, it's another thing, but that's, I think.
Good point.
Yeah.
Group 2. All right, for group 2, Roxana is gonna be our spokesperson with that. And then.
Let's see, first of all, I want to say 10 minutes or whatever amount of time we were out there was not enough. I feel like we're just getting to the meat and potatoes at the very end there. But so we started with a question, well, we started all over the map, but Andrew asked the question about the stock in town and how much new construction there actually is still to be built out, and it's only 5% of town. So then the focus became what is happening with the current stock, right? The remodels that are coming for perpetuity. So prioritizing, and one of the conversations was the mandatory reporting and benchmarking. So how does that get triggered? And I think one of the things that was brought up is as soon as there's a sale, that building has to be assessed and the energy efficiency of that building reported. And then perhaps from there, we go into what incentives are available for that new buyer to upgrade the energy efficiency of those buildings. If they're not doing a remodel, I think would be my question. And then what happens if they do remodel? I think already we have a trigger for about 50%, correct? But does that come down further? Is one of the things, and I believe that for all of us, probably for it to come down a little lower was certainly a point of agreement. And so that moves us to the discussion of the all electric, which I think pretty much is already implemented. So there's like no real feedback there, but this kind of gets into the question of like, what does that really mean? And what are the challenges and impacts that that's creating right now? One of the points that was brought up was the difficulty in placing the heat pumps for the buildings because of the snow shed conditions. Which also kind of led into the discussion of site-specific energy
production, which would be like solar panels. And again, the challenges of that in town, because we have really close lots, and so a lot of times you're shaded and it's not really effective. And so, the question of the solar farms were brought up. I volunteered that I think it should be Red Lady, that has a great flag. Huge solar farm up there, not popular. And so then the next question would be prioritizing in the new guidelines, revisions and the codes, prioritizing energy efficiency with these new guidelines. And then that is, to me, it sort of tied into what kind of historic preservation plan we adopt. Whether it's one that allows us for more flexibility outside of the core or not, because the conversation there's about, you know, reforms and how do we maximize our spaces for the heat pumps and for the solar panels and so forth. So I talked about the challenges, and then one of the things that we really kind of started to talk about again that I thought was really interesting was like, what are the incentives that can be put in place? I really wanted to emphasize incentives for locals doing remodels, because usually their means are a little bit less, and so that what can the town do to provide grants and so forth. But the point that Anna brought up was to incentivize actually the lowest energy efficient buildings get the incentives and the plans, so that, you know, assumption being that there's a Venn diagram there with the overlap of locally owned, very energy inefficient buildings will get, you know, prioritized in that conversion. So lots of space for, you know, continuing discussion there. I don't think we answered any questions, but we definitely had good discussions. I don't know, what did I miss?
I would just chime in on this group too. We agreed that the issue that Cal brought up earlier with making sure there's alignment, that's probably a missing tool that was identified.
Anything else? Anybody else that was in the meeting or the team with us?
On the reporting, are you talking about like doing some sort of energy audit, or you know, does the town have access to these? Do they have access to all the data of who's using what, or just what is being brought into town as a whole? Here's what we
Big
reviewed.
brother.
It's just the aggregate.
I mean, in theory,
Individuals have to provide permission.
Yeah.
but I guess that's what I'm getting at. You
Correct.
could have owners grant permission to access the energy.
Correct, yeah, and that was part of it, is how do we dial up that, you know, energy reporting
Right.
for each home, so we can get a real data set.
And I wanna say some places there's, I wanna say like Aspen or Pickett is working on commercial, like we, you know, we do have commercial buildings, there's obviously are much bigger on policy that like demands disclosure, benchmarking of energy use. I think there's also possible litigations.
And Roxanna, you had said that you discussed the energy audit in conjunction with a sale. Were you talking about before the sale or?
I don't think we got that specific, but it was more like the sale triggers it, and this would potentially be more for residential, but obviously commercial as well.
Usually thought of as part of disclosure. Okay, and, you know, one of, I was thinking in Europe, when a house is on the market, its energy efficiency is part of the sales pitch, and so that's an incentive. As you were thinking, oh, I'm going to put my house on the market. If that had to be disclosed beforehand, like well beforehand, it would motivate something perhaps. You know, not just remodeling the kitchen, but also.
Yeah, and clear, I mean, we can also obviously implement ways for just to request or incentivize or offer that, the energy audits to every home in town. I don't know how we do that, but I'm sure the town can create a campaign to try to get at least a 50% read on what we have in stock, right? Particularly on older homes. And I think it's of value to do it to the core, to all of those historic homes, which some of them are insulated with newspaper.
So if you're lucky.
Does the town require your fan tests?
At the end.
One thought I had about energy efficiency in homes, You've got a 2000 home, it's built 2000. It's got a gas furnace compared to the new furnaces. It's really inefficient. And if there would be some way to incentivize folks or over time perhaps require folks to trade out those boilers, that could really help, I think, as far as energy efficiency coming from the houses.
I would say there are a lot of incentives available right now, so perhaps one place easy win for us is to do a better job of awareness. Right, whether it's the GCPA or the Investment Act, or the town does have a number of incentives for electrification and whatnot. So maybe we start at least with just helping to let, well, GCPA has an energy audit rebate program partner with you for your home right now. We could help everyone know that. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest challenge in the world we're in right now. We're all flooded with incredible amounts of information.
Everyone.
Yeah.
I think very.
So my question is very steps, what's our occupancy rate?
We'll have that.
It's falling.
Sure.
So we're
50-50
The
maybe.
previous census was 65, I would say.
Occupied, yeah, so I was thinking 60-40 was our.
I think it's lower than that, but.
So maybe
no.
50-50. So where's the discussion at with all these homes that are using resources year round to be used as a business, sometimes making people money, or to be used at their discretion as a luxury? Either way, it's a luxury to use resources in our town to either make money or have it just perfect when you want it to show up. So that's at least half of our building energy use, which is the biggest category we're looking at here today. So where's that discussion at? Like, where is that?
Where were you intervening?
Well, I mean, I wasn't in that group, so that's why I'm bringing it up now, and that's that's half of what we're talking about here, which is 90% of the discussion today, right? Like, so where's that at? And then having just engaged in this remodeling, doing an energy assessment, I probably sold more energy efficient upgrades to clients that weren't even supported by the energy efficiency study. You know, it was a great report, it was pages long, you might even got to see it. Their biggest recommendation was like weather stripping and air sealing, which we've been talking about for 20 years, but it's like, I sold them on, let's upgrade your roof insulation all over, not just in the little place where we're at. Like, I really think we need to dig deeper with what we're recommending, what the technologies are. Like, we can sell more, but that report didn't help my sales pitch. I sold it before, the report backed it up, kind of, but it really, and I mean, I don't know, just more air sealing and weather stripping is not something I could sell.
So
It's like,
how does that
that's
happen?
30% efficiency.
Yeah, it's not sexy, but it does help a lot.
Well, it's hard, I mean,
That should be the status quo.
what's that?
Yeah,
Stripping and air sealing.
Yeah.
Sure, but that was like the best recommendation that came from this 2-week process and 4 hours of still meeting there. I'm like, yeah, okay, but like, how do we achieve that with, we're not gonna replace all your windows, like, how do we effectively weather strip these double homes or something, like. It's
So-
not that achievable.
Eric, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is that something that, for example, you as a builder, if the town, part of their climate action plan were to create it, like, here's the Cadillac list of energy efficiency, this is like a net zero home, and then here's a next level, and you can, as a builder or as a homeowner who's remodeling, can check the boxes of, let's do this R value in the roof, let's do this kind of window, and the town in itself is putting incentives for, if you're upping your R value to this much, then maybe you get some kind of break or some kind of incentive to maximize those and check those boxes. But the tool is given like in a little like list, so so then it's not on just the limited knowledge or the knowledge of the builder itself, but we've already provided them with a full toolkit to have that conversation during the remodel process.
Sure, yeah, or maybe like a better checklist, because to me, adding R20 to the roof is something that can't wear out over time, it's gonna be there, it's passively helping the home retain energy. Whereas you add all this weather stripping and then people up and down with the windows, in and out with the doors, and it falls off or whatever, it's an applied product. It's not as resilient, I feel like that's something you're gonna have to constantly be maintaining, whereas you do that R20, it's gonna be there forever. for the life of the house, you know, and nobody has to do anything to maintain it. It's been applied, it's there, we can argue about the materials you use for that further, but. You know, I feel like some of these upgrades could be more valuable than others, I'm not like trying to detract from the air sealing, but it's a hard thing to. Also maintain, you know, it's one of those things that's gonna need constant attention, people don't like constant attention, you know, you're doing this remodel, you want it to last a decade, maybe two. You're not gonna call me back every year, I mean, some conscientious homeowner might call me back every year to address the weather stripping, but like, no.
For group two, it sounds like that's why going higher on this existing structure is helpful in case I know you're.
Yeah, so, Eric, it's interesting to get your feedback on that. It sounds like maybe there needs to be also a little bit more education happening. Typically these reports, they show the best return on investment, and that's where that's where the highlight is. It happens to be that these unsexy things like weather stripping and air sealing are the best return on investment, but you like, and they're like, from an energy savings perspective, their life expectancy is like 10 years, right? Whereas a roof is like 30 years or something like that. So yes, you do have to go back, not every year, but maybe every 10 years, to do like that air sealing aspect of your house. So I think that can be a little bit more of an output in terms of not just maybe presenting the report, but having like more interactions after that report. And in the building group, we were also talking about maybe some mandatory things to as well, like it's an interaction. With regards to the benchmarking, yes, we did talk about well, that the houses for sale, but like one tool could also be that you require benchmarking for the short-term rentals. So with regards to your point that you did earlier, so you can, and the town right now is monitoring quite closely the short-term rentals. So that can be a pool of homes where you can at least start with the benchmarking. So that's another opportunity. And then another one would be like multi-family housing. So there, it's not just sales. But it's also, but it's also.
We have yet chance to interact there based on that information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys. Please don't forget to add your groups dots to the shared board as you know. All right, Ed is going to be group one. I've done too much talking today, so I'm just going to stand here silently.
Thank you, describe
I will say I was impressed that Roxana took 15 minutes to report on a 10-minute meeting.
I'll get you the.
We only had 2 columns, 10 minutes is fine. We never got to the meat and potatoes either. But he had said meat and potatoes. We didn't have meat and potatoes.
Is being brought in now.
Okay. For us, the 2 categories were the purchase, invest, and advocacy. The conversation that we sort of started with was sort of the definitions of both. And we really used, if you will, question 3 as the benchmark to look at that. If we're looking at, purchase and invest or advocacy, there are clearly ways that we can invest. Use the analogy of airlines are all net zero because of their offsets and their investments. And what they do, we could do that and promote that, but that may not actually fit into our community goals and our community intentions. So while we looked at the 2 categories we had, we sort of pretty quickly started talking about a 3rd category. And the 3rd category was really more along the lines of generation, as we're talking about energy. So the question was generation and whether it is down valley, in the state, or on your roof or in your garden. And the conversation, if we're looking at that as the mixing box and raising it up or down, or we're looking at generation being more local, to the point of our roofs and our gardens and our backyard, or are we looking at generation being here local in town? The conversation in town, if we're looking at generation, it isn't just electricity. Are we tapping Big Mine for methane? Are we tapping Kepler for wind? Are we tapping, what is the broader conversation of generation? So whether it was a third column that we sort of drew in on ours and said generation could be its own, or whether it was part of purchase and invest, we sort of felt purchase and invest was more of that conversation of how we're purchasing, who we're purchasing, and how we invest. And generation is more a conversation. Should we be promoting more on-site, local, individual generation? So as we look through it, we definitely felt the moving of the conversation of advocacy. We wanted to peg advocacy as high as we could, and look at how we could look at advocacy at the state and federal level. On the purchase and invest, we again felt that we should be moving that up as high as we could, looking at municipal utilities. And then on the category of generation, we needed more information. There was a lot of conversation. We had, wind turbines at Kepler, does that even make any sense? Other communities do. We tend to, I'm saying I live that side of town, there's a lot of wind that comes through there. We should look more at that conversation before we say we should peg one direction or the other. The other conversation that we did migrate to, again, because we had only 2 columns and we didn't have any meat and potatoes. We did talk a lot about the conversation as to whether this was becoming a climate action toolbox or just an energy trash toolbox. By that, if we're looking at a climate action toolbox, to some of the conversations that we had before the breakout, are we having more conversations about climate? Are we having more conversations in this discussion? Should water be a discussion, a bigger discussion for us? We all know we're at the headwaters, we don't care, we got all the water we want. My basement has all the water it wants. Is that something we don't care about? Or looking globally and looking at actually environmental problems that we're all going to be dealing with, is water a bigger issue for us, and should be talking more about returning water in the aquifer, conserving, sustaining. If we're talking about our amusement park, are we talking more about fire and beetle kill and other climate issues, not just the off-gassing, not just what we do with how we use electricity or not. So we discussed it, but realized it wasn't for this conversation. We just wanted to make sure that it wasn't left off of the conversation. If it's climate action does include trail management, avalanche management, beetle kill management. It's all part of the climate, even if it may or may not have to do with electricity.
And I'll just add in, there was some interesting discussion on the generation piece of, do we go to a municipal utility in the sense there could maybe be more data, more seeing kind of how things are used, but also trade-offs of a lot of resources, investment, money that would go into that. And kind of talking through, maybe 5 years ago, we weren't seeing much traction with Tri-State on moving to renewables. Maybe that would have been more of a focus. Where now, do we just keep pushing and focusing on if they're moving in that direction and spend our resources elsewhere? But there was definitely agreement that we want to really kind of ramp up subsidizing renewable energy infrastructure, and some overlaps and connections to the other plans were made in the sense of, can we commingle where if we're working on an intercept lot or a park and ride, for example, can we commingle that with solar or something like that, or a big housing project with community solar, things, opportunities like that. And then there was a question, do we add a bar around kind of more localized energy, facilitating local energy development at like the building scale? And maybe that's something we look into, but the question of, is it more effective to really push for the utility scale changes versus at the building level, where maybe we could better facilitate that, but it's not something we need to invest in. It's something more data can help with.
Other members of the committee, do you have anything? Eric? Good.
And I think that theme of the resiliency, definitely came up and came up with group 3 as well, and that desire to touch, that sustainability, resiliency, adaptability, and sort of a discussion on where that all fits in.
Good point.
Our group touched on this briefly to the idea of energy production on the site, but how it touches on the historic preservation plan and the climate action plan, and what Cal was saying about how buildings are designed. And I know Linda brought it up. We have a lot of existing buildings, like was mentioned earlier. We have very few vacant lots in town. So Andrew and folks like Andrew and Kent are dealing with buildings that are existing where maybe they aren't the best roofs to put solar on. And so the idea of a solar farm or what's the town advocating for, so I think it touches on all those different things.
Andrew?
Do we have any, gauge on how much water is used for irrigation in the summer? And do we, what is that?
Like, I don't know off the top of my head, absolutely, we can count it, our like during irrigation this season versus regular,
Do we have any direction towards gray water usage?
not gray water specific.
I think the bigger issue is just how impervious we are. We get, in our monsoon season, everything runs down the street, down to the creek, and doesn't go back into, most of the time, our irrigation goes back into the soil. It's the whole point, but everything else doesn't. And I get it, and we've had a conversation. The conversation is where they have water. All the water starts here, we don't have that problem. I don't know that's a good reason to not do something.
The council has taken steps to incentivize water use through paying, we use more, pay more, pay at a higher rate. The town has also worked really hard to get all of our field spaces on untreated water. We're still using water, obviously, but we're not putting the power and energy and chemicals into treating that water. And we are doing a pilot program to start converting some of our passive use sodded areas or bluegrass areas to native species. And I believe Janet is working this summer to launch for educational information for the community on how community members can take that on. I think that's the first step with intention to sort of tighten that up. Private property in the future.
I think it's a good reminder to think too for water, for waste or anything. I think what I heard from the council work session, the discussion's happening is not that, oh, that's not important. Like we can still absolutely pursue these different initiatives and these things that are important to the community. But the question is what really, going back, what really is the specific goal the climate action plan is right now is focused on reducing emissions, where the next step would be the more resilience of that adaptation strategy. And that's kind of the question, especially now, not like, oh, water is not important. It is, but we still want to do things, but what's within the scope? And no matter what, we have to really clearly tell the story of that.
Just want to close by saying I did notice that it was all those our members that were reporters, so. Thank you.
Yes.
How did it stop?
And Andrew, to answer your question very generally about indoor versus outdoor water use, one thing we see kind of as a general rule of thumb, it's about 1/3 of what we use totally in the outdoor in the summertime is what we use indoors. So if you use 6,000 million gallons per day as a community in the indoor use, in the summer, you probably use 3 times that. So that's generally a ballpark of what communities. Yeah, it increases a lot, and the irrigation, for agricultural purposes is the vast majority in our network. See a lot of water goes there, but that I think is a good topic for some of the roundtable discussion. I think our food is here, so let's grab some food and then we can come back and go a little bit deeper into this roundtable if you can stick around. And if you also would be willing to, given this discussion, where would you move your dots? And we've got this shared toolkit here, so we'll go ahead and put all group 1 through 3 down below. And then if you want to place your individual dots, we'll get some dots and stars and unicorns and rainbows up here for you to see.
And if you have to go, thank you so much for your time today. Please grab some food on your way out, but if you're able to stay for lunch, we'll just kind of do a quick found out and what were your key takeaways. So we know we're a little over, so just thank you all so much for your time. There's nowhere. Yeah.
Well, thank you all.
That's good.
I think sandwiches and that.